Hey, family. Welcome to Healing Conversations brought to you by the Hope Center, where healing takes center stage. Today, we are so excited to welcome back Healing Conversations with a special rebroadcast featuring Hope Center's very own Dr. Henry Willis. But before we begin, I'm Julius J.U. Jones, and these are your Hope Center Harlem announcements. As we prepare for today's broadcast, make sure to chime in and tell us where you're shouting from and what hope means to you. And announcements, join us on Saturday, September 24th, as we host our annual Wellness and Self-Care Fair. The Hope Center is taking over West 119th Street to host a day of activities, fun, and zen. There will be activities for both kids and adults, such as tie-dye, learning to knit, crocheting, and beading. There will also be free food, a dope DJ, and so much more. So don't miss out on this amazing event. And guess what? There will be a community baby shower where new and expecting moms will learn safe sleep techniques and receive amazing starter gifts. See you Saturday. Join the Hope Center for Walk It Out, a 4-week walking group. This series will be from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. beginning Saturday, October 1st. Participants will learn the benefits that movement has on mental health and building community. Walkers will meet at Frederick Douglass statue located at the roundabout on West 110th Street and Frederick Douglass Avenue. All are welcome. The Hope Center presents Community in Action Day on Saturday, November 5th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. The team will host a series of activities that are youth-based. The morning will start with coffee and conversations with Pastor Mike and Pastor Trey. A lunch and learn right after, and the event ends with a discussion panel. Parents are welcome to attend. Registration is preferred. Visit www.sneakerballnyc.org for info and to register today. The Hope Center is proud to present the inaugural Sneaker Ball, an event where fashion and art come together for mental health awareness and charity. Dedicated to creating awareness around youth and adult mental health services and programming, the Sneaker Ball will feature live entertainment, cocktails, celebrity appearances, and so much more. I'm so happy I can't even talk today. Tickets are on sale and you can purchase them at sneakerballnyc.org. Well, that's it for now, Hope Center family. Remember to follow and stay in the know with all things Hope Center Harlem on social media. Whether you tap in via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or YouTube, the key is to continue to heal on purpose and evolve. The Hope Center's crisis text line is free, 24/7 and confidential. If you ever need someone to talk to about life's multitude of moments, text Worthy to 741-741. That's Worthy to 741-741. Also, Support Hope Center Harlem programming and mission through two easy ways to give. Whether you text to give or give via the Hope Center's website, all donations support the good work of the Hope Center and are tax deductible. As we conclude the Hope Center Harlem announcements for today, I'm Julius J.U. Jones, and it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce today's host, Dr. Henry Willis. Holding a Bachelor of Science in Psychology from Howard University, a Master's of Arts in Clinical Psychology from Columbia University, and a PhD in Clinical Psychology from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Dr. Henry Willis is an integral part of the Hope Center team. His research interests include exploring the relationship between online and offline racial discrimination and mental health outcomes, understanding social cultural protective factors, and how they impact psychopathology within African Americans, creating cultural adaptations of evidence-based treatments, and utilizing mobile health technology to increase access to mental health treatments for underserved populations. Dr. Willis is currently a postdoctoral research scientist at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice and Columbia University School of Social Work. It is my esteemed honor to introduce you to your host for tonight, Dr. Henry Willis.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you, Julius, for the awesome introduction. Again, my name is Dr. Henry Willis, and I'm happy to be today's host for the Hope Center's Healing Conversation. And so I know Julius will ask you all about this, but I want to get a sense of from folks, what does hope mean to you? And what hope means to me is Black joy, pure Black joy, and mental health equity and access to all. I see Robin is in the chat. Hi, Robin. Welcome. She's repping Bronx. And she says, hope means granting new mercies, granting herself new mercies. Right. Someone from Facebook also know that hope means healing on purpose and evolving, which is what the Hope Center stands for. I wonder who else we have out there today. Thanks, Robin. And next, I want to talk a little bit about the mission of the Hope Center. And our mission here at the Hope Center is to provide quality therapeutic services to the Harlem community in an effort to directly impact mental health needs and promote mental health and wellness. And our vision is to really empower and support our community in the process of creating and sustaining lifelong wellness. And we have two events coming up that Julius already mentioned. And I want to just reiterate those because I'm really looking forward to these events. The first event is the Hope Center's Wellness and Self-Care Fair, which will be this Saturday, September 24th from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And you can catch us on 119th Street between St. Nicholas and ACP Junior Boulevard. So I'm personally excited to come out and see the DJ, listen to the DJ. I'm excited to have some food, hit up the ice cream stand. So I really hope you all will join us. And I'm also really excited about our inaugural sneaker ball, which will be November 5th at 6 p.m. Just a reminder, at our ball, we'll have formal attire and sneakers. I'm really looking forward to picking out my outfit, getting some new shoes. And if you really want to learn more about this event, you can go to at Sneakerball NYC to learn more about the event and to get tickets. And so now I want us to transition to today's healing conversation. And this healing conversation is actually a rebroadcast, and we're going to revisit back to a previous panel called Saving Our Sons, a closer look at suicide in Black and Latino boys. And before we get into some of the information from last time, I want to share just some stats about suicide. First, we know that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death overall in the United States. We also know that suicide was the second leading cause of death among individuals between the ages of 10 and 34. We know that suicide among males is 4 times higher than among females. And we also know that among Black and Latino populations or communities, suicide rates tend to peak during adolescence all the way into young adulthood. And so before we get into our questions, I would like to talk a little bit about some of our panelists that you'll be seeing in today's rebroadcast healing conversation. But I did want to say a little bit about suicide. As a mental health practitioner and researcher, suicide is something that's really important to me in terms of understanding some of the rising causes and rates of suicide among our Black and Latino boys. And more importantly, really trying to figure out ways to create interventions to help improve access to mental health services for these communities. And so I'd like to introduce the panelists that you'll see in our rebroadcast. First, here is Dr. Alina Green, who is the executive director of the Hope Center Harlem. She's a clinical social worker, a psychotherapist, and also a fatherhood practitioner, and she'll be moderating the conversation. You'll also see Dr. Michael Lindsay, who's the executive director of the Max Silver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research at NYU, the Constance and Martin Silver Professor of Poverty Studies at NYU Silver School of Social Work, and an Aspen Health Innovators Fellow. Dr. Lindsay also is a part of the working group of experts supporting the Congressional Black Caucus Emergency Task Force on Black Youth Suicide and Mental Health. You'll also see Dr. Michael McCrae, who is a clinical psychologist and the Assistant Commissioner of the New York City Department of Mental Health Bureau of Health Promotion for Justice-Impacted Populations. Anchoring his work in a trauma and resilience-informed framework, Dr. McCrae centers relationship building, racial and social justice, and inclusion to serve the most marginalized individuals in their communities. And finally, you'll also hear from Dr. Sydney Hankerson, who is the former co-director of the Columbia University Wellness Center, assistant professor of psychiatry at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, and a research scientist at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He's also a practicing psychiatrist, and he's currently at Mount Sinai. And so to kick us off with our first question, you'll hear from Dr. Green, and she'll be talking a little bit about why is this such an important topic? Why should people care about what's happening with Black and Latino boys? And why might this topic be personal to the panelists that you'll see in just a moment?
I want to open this first question up to all of our panelists and ask, why is this such an important topic? Why should people care about what is happening with Black and Latino boys? And why might this topic be personal to you?
I'm happy to jump in there. First and foremost, thank you, Dr. Green, for your introduction. And I'm also really honored to be here with two brothers that I really admire, Sydney and Michael. Michael is my Morehouse brother. Sydney, you're my fraternity brother. So this is really great to be here with you all. This is important because, Dr. Green, we're talking about our sons. We're talking about our nephews. We're talking about our cousins, our brothers. We're talking about people that we see and we care about on a daily basis. And the fact of the matter is the numbers are astonishing in terms of what is happening with this population regarding the rising trends in suicide behaviors. We're seeing these trends go upward, and they have been doing so for the last 20 to 25 years. And so if we want to help those young people that we care about, that we love, then I think we have to be talking about I frame it as sometimes the pink elephant in the room. It weighs 10,000 tons. We're not talking about it. And sometimes we don't know what it looks like. We don't know how to engage our young people on these matters. And so tonight's discussion is really about helping us to bring those matters to the fore so that we can talk about them and deal with them in ways that are going to help us to save lives.
Thank you so much. I know there are probably a few young people who are joining us for this conversation tonight as well, but I know that there's so many people, whether they're teachers or researchers or parents who are joining us, right? I think I shared with you earlier that I'm a part of a village of several young boys in my family, ranging in ages from 11 to 16, who are working towards navigating life and so many challenges and so many stressors, and those compounded during COVID. And so for me, this conversation is especially important as well.
Yeah. So I guess I'll take a stab next. I want to echo, Michael's sentiments and just thank you, Dr. Green, and the Hope Center for convening this conversation. It's so needed, and it's so often swept under the rug in our community. And I'd like to say, just as a putting it out there, that suicide can be a trigger for many people, and for people who listening tonight may have lost someone to suicide, and or may have made a suicide attempt in the past. We hear you, we acknowledge your presence, and later this evening resources will be shared for those. And so I think that's just so important to frame. But this is an important topic for several reasons. And Michael really is a national expert in addressing the importance of this topic. I see this topic of suicide in Black and Latino boys through the lens of social justice. For the first time in our country's history, Black boys between the ages of 5 and 12 have higher rates of suicide than white boys. And so when people hear that statistic, they're in shock. Because suicide is not something that we think about that happens in the Black and Latino communities. It's not something that we talk about. And it's certainly not something that we typically provide resources for. So this is really an issue that is affecting the next generation of Black men. It's something that we need to address. And I will say that, on a personal note, navigating the challenges of adolescence, of childhood as a Black boy in mostly white spaces, it was a very difficult time. And certainly, while I never actually, made a suicide attempt, I definitely did struggle with periods of depression in my adolescence, in my youth. And we know that depression is one of the most common risk factors for suicide. So this issue is so important to me on a personal level as well as a societal level. And it's so crucial that we're bringing it to light in this event.
So much has already been said. Following Michael and Sydney, I can't help but think that, I was most kind of excited about this conversation because I am thinking about the healing piece of it and the hope piece. So I see this as an opportunity to kind of get an understanding and kind of level set around kind of what's going on, what things need to be done, kind of at structural levels, practical levels, all those levels, and really how to move, our community together, forward. I think for me personally, echoing kind of Dr. Henker said, I think about myself. I was once a Black boy. I'm a Black man, and I realized that kind of experience, and I saw it when I was younger, and I see it now for kids who are that age, and it feels like it's even a heavier burden at times. Social media, bullying. Think about kind of pervasive racism. That is kind of bubbling up, has been bubbling up, and it's kind of now very public and talking about it, and that's very triggering for people. And that racism comes with systemic things, or hurdles that are barriers to access and care. So to me, it's a time to acknowledge kind of this and really start to think about how can we move to kind of fill in those gaps to make sure that we are really taking care of the next generation of Black men.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate everything that our panelists talked about. And for me, talking about suicide, or this topic of suicide, is really important, because just having the conversation begins to destigmatize, talking about mental health and talking about things like suicide, particularly in the Black community, where we have suffered a lot of stigma around talking about these particular topics. And I think it also is important because it normalizes that not only that suicide is a rising issue among our Black and Latino boys, but also it opens the door for folks to begin to say that it's okay to not be okay. It opens the door for healing, and it opens the door for hope. And in terms of why this is personally important to me as a Black man, as a Black researcher, having nephews, etc., it's really important that I'm leading the charge in helping to create resources and things to help reduce the burden of mental health stigma and suicide. And also, as a Black researcher, it's if not us, if we're not doing the work, then who else can we depend on? And so this is really personal to me for a variety of reasons. And now we'll move on to the second question, which is, what are some of the contributing factors in the rising rates of suicide among Black and Latino boys?
I want to move to the next question, and that is, what are some of the contributing factors to the rising rates of suicide in Black and Latino boys? And I think that's going to lead us into our next question that talks a little bit more also about what depression looks like. But let's talk a little bit about what are some of the things that are contributing to these rising rates.
I'll tackle that one if you all don't mind first. So a number of things, and I can go on and on about what are some of the risk factors and things that we should be looking for. But the reality is that we still need to understand what is happening with Black and Latino boys, because quite frankly, the research is not always clear about what are the telltale signs. But what we do know is that Black and Latinx boys or children are over suspended and expelled from school. I'm going to start there as a contributing factor. They are typically suspended or expelled from school for behaviors that are treatable in terms of behavioral health, right? Oftentimes it is the case that their white counterparts will receive those services because they attend schools where those services are available. Oftentimes it is the case for Black and Latino boys is that they're attending schools and there's no behavioral health professional. And so the over suspension or expulsion from schools leads to lack of attunement to behavioral health issues that could be treated and will avert those trajectories into more serious self-harm behaviors like suicide. We also know that when, and Sydney, pointed to his own background in terms of his experiences with struggling with depression. Oftentimes it is the case as an adolescent. We all struggled with that anxiety, trauma from our experiences. But the reality is that we don't always get treated for those. There's stigma in our community with respect to mental health or even the experience of mental health challenges. And so, I'm thinking about this popular meme that was going around last year where I saw this young Black kid washing dishes, and he says to his mom, "I'm depressed." And the mom says, "You better depress those dishes." And it's sometimes the case that, the problems that manifest for Black and Latino boys don't get perceived or thought of to be mental health issues, but then there's a stigma related to connecting to those mental health and behavioral health supports. And I also think, I think it was Michael or Sydney, one of the brothers alluded to the fact that you see a lot of racial trauma that is happening in our society with respect to vigilante or even law enforcement killings of Black and Latino folks. And I think that those sort of traumas and viewing and seeing all of that engenders this sense of hopelessness about what it means to have Black or brown skin and in the context of the United States. And I think then that what you see is young folks are ending their lives before they've barely begun their lives because they perceive that there's no hope for them in the future. There's no appreciation for who they are. They're not seen or viewed from an equity lens, and that sort of puts them in a place where they feel hopeless and they feel like they just don't have a reason to live. And so it's really sad. And I really, want us to appreciate, as we are with this conversation, just how much this is happening in our society. I just last night helped a family that contacted me from Atlanta whose son just died by suicide a month ago. And they are struggling with the aftermath of their loss and what has happened, and didn't know where to go for help. And so I was able to connect them with a clinician in Atlanta. But this is happening so much. And so I really appreciate this conversation. I'll stop there because I could go on. But those are the things that I think are really prominent in terms of why we're seeing these rising trends.
Anyone else want to add to that before we move on to the next question?
I mean, I like the kind of framework and thinking around like how the kind of trauma lens. I mean, if you think about Black and brown mothers are more likely to give to die during childbirth. I mean, it starts before the womb, in the womb. And so from the very beginning, there are issues around equity and access from the very beginning, from very young. All the traumas, poverty. We know poverty rates for Black and brown children. I mean, here in New York, right? You see it, right? You see that the areas where there are the most mental health concerns, substance use concerns, social determinants of health concerns, they're all clustered in very similar patterned ways, right? And so, like you said, Dr. Lindsay said earlier, you kind of are in this space, and you can foster a sense of hopelessness. You see, the violence, the attacks on Black men. What does that do to the psyche, and what that means for you as your future? You have neighborhood violence, pervasive. And again, a lot of this I think is structural. And so I think sometimes it's hard to just to understand that these are not you. There are these are structures that are really impacting kind of how you're presenting. So I think sometimes that kind of all the trauma gets internalized, and it's very difficult to break from that. And I think Black boys have an especially difficult time, particularly during adolescence and kind of young adulthood. You see rises in suicide rates between like 18 and 24. So, a pretty significant jump from below 18 years old. So that's a specifically a challenging time for most people. I mean, Black men on top of that have additional kind of barrier or burdens. So, yes.
All right. So such amazing answers from our guest panelists, and it's difficult to kind of follow them, but I have a few comments that I would definitely like to add in terms of just things for us to think about in terms of factors that can contribute to suicide. So one thing that I explore and that I've seen has contributed to suicide is experiences of racism in online, such as on social media. So imagine Black and Latino boys being, already not being in environments that are affirming or where they feel like they belong, and then they go into their online spaces, such as Twitter or TikTok, and they feel as if they're also being excluded or being discriminated against in those places, and they often can kind of feel like a double punch, and that can increase that feeling of worthlessness and not feeling as if they belong. And so, just being on the lookout for those experiences could be something that's really helpful for us to discuss and keep on our radar. Another thing that plays a role in increasing rates of suicide is structural racism, and this means not having enough mental health resources that are tailored particularly to our Black and Latino boys. And so this may mean not having enough mental health prevention resources in schools or in the community, or even mental health services or intervention services. I also like to look at from the frame of what can give us hope in despite these factors that are contributing to suicide. And I believe that, beliefs about what it means to be Black, or particularly beliefs about feeling proud about being Black, can be something that we can really look towards to as something that can help cope with the rising rates of suicide. And so just feeling proud about being Black can help our youth cope with these experiences of racism and trauma that they're experiencing. And it can also help them challenge any messages of inferiority or feelings that they don't belong, which we know are associated with rising suicide risk. And this might mean for parents or family members or even community leaders thinking about ways of how can we increase these positive identity messages when we interact with our Black and Latino boys, and how can we increase exposure to these different positive messages about their race in media and other and in other contexts. And so now we'll transition to our next question, which is what can depression look like in boys and how does it show up differently?
Depression has come up in our conversation several times, and I want to take a few minutes to allow us to talk about what depression can look like in boys, because I think it looks differently. I've had this conversation many times with Dr. Hankerson, especially as it relates to my work in working with young fathers and Black and Latino fathers specifically. Just, what depression looks like, how it shows up differently. So I'm going to open that up and give the floor back.
So yeah, I'll take a stab at this. I think that for our listeners, I think Dr. Lindsay provided such a poignant example of that meme of how mental health in our community can be shot down. And the mother, I hadn't seen that, so I would love to actually see it. But you got to depress them. I mean, it may be funny on the outset, but what that young man is learning is that you don't share your feelings. And I've seen some of the comments from our listeners tonight, and it really speaks to a lot of the gender norms about this perception that we, especially as Black men, have to man up. Real men don't cry. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think there's so many intersectionalities at play as it relates to gender, first and foremost, but also as it relates to race. And so, I think first and foremost, when we talk about depression, it's important for people to realize that depression is a clinical condition. As clinicians, when we talk about depression, we're talking about an illness that is actually the number one cause of disability in the world. So there are more people suffering. There are more people who are not able to work. There are more people who are not able to live the lives that they want to live from depression than any other medical condition. And so that's a huge issue. And depression is also the number one cause of disability in New York City. And so, when we talk about depression as a clinician, we're talking about a period of at least traditionally, 2 weeks where you have the hallmark features of depression are feeling sad or having depressed mood or kind of feeling in the blues, or you don't enjoy activities that you would normally enjoy. So as an example, if you love normally watching the March Madness, the NCAA tournament, which is going on now, if someone were depressed, they would get no enjoyment or pleasure out of watching those games and wouldn't want to do that. And so those are really the two core features or symptoms of depression. And there are kind of 9 other symptoms ranging from appetite changes to difficulty concentrating to sleep problems. And I think it's important for people to realize that having thoughts of suicide or actually making a suicide attempt are one of the 9 symptoms of depression. And so that's why the link between depression and suicide is so intertwined, because having thoughts of suicide is actually one of the core features of clinical depression. Now, in boys, and in Black boys in particular, depression can look and does look different. Instead of, kids talking about feeling sad or depressed, they may act out and have, irritability or get into fights. And so that's a key difference. Another key difference is kind of withdrawal. Men, when we tend to get angry or down, we kind of go inward at times and completely check out from engaging with friends or may withdraw from social media. And so that's another important thing to look out for, as well as substance use. There's a huge relationship in kids and youth with substance use, whether it's, patients have told me that they smoke weed at night just to get to sleep, or because they're feeling really anxious and down. And that one joint can lead to smoking all throughout the day, to using other substances. So it can be kind of a chicken and the egg type of scenario. And I think, one thing that Dr. Lindsay has found in his research is that Black boys in particular tend not to express suicidal ideations or suicidal thoughts. They go directly from just to making a suicide attempt. And so there's something that we don't know about maybe how depression and suicide looks like in boys of color that is drastically needed for us to really make a dent in this crisis.
Yeah, no, that's Dr. Hankerson hit it out of the ballpark with just really giving us that important broad overview of, but specific to what's happening with Black boys and depression. What it looks like is I had a kid once tell me when I'm sad and down, who was depressed, right? He said, when I'm sad and down, I want to go and knock somebody's head off because I want them to feel the same pain I feel. So you do see, as Dr. Hankerson said, irritability, impulsivity, and anger, and those things that we traditionally or historically have identified as being aggressive or disruptive behavior. And oftentimes when I do this work in schools, I will say to school personnel, that kid who's fighting or being disruptive in class or whatever, have you sat for a moment with that kid and asked that kid, are you angry about something? Did someone hurt you? Because what's really underneath a lot of the outward display of behaviors we see is this internal pain and struggle. I also want to just echo something that Dr. Hankerson said, which is that we often hear from kids that they have a headache or a stomach ache. And if it's persistent and you constantly hear that, that is also a warning sign that the kid might be depressed or anxious or even dealing with trauma of some nature. And so it's good to hone in a bit more and sort of get a sense of what it is they're struggling with to further confirm that it might be a mental health struggle.
Yes.
And our panelists did an amazing job at discussing some of the ways, or many of the ways, that depression looks like in Black and Latino boys. And so I really would just like to reiterate some of the things that they talked about. First, really being on the lookout, or depression can really look like not being able to tolerate stress. And we know that for Black and Latino boys, this inability or difficulty tolerating stress comes from because of these intense feelings of sadness and feeling overwhelmed with their daily life because of depression. It's also really important to think about or to know that depression can look like withdrawal, and withdrawal can look not only like withdrawing from activities that they used to enjoy, such as maybe playing video games or watching TV, but it can also mean withdrawing from people. So it withdrawing from their friends, withdrawing from their family members and loved ones. So being on the lookout for that is important because it's a really big sign of depression. I also would like to reiterate that we know that increased substance use is a way that depression manifests among folks, and this is because substances can help both numb the depression, but this is dangerous because it can also increase risk for suicide. So what that means is that when folks are under the influence of drugs or substances, it can make them more impulsive or more likely to do something that's harmful. And I think it's also important to really think about how can we find out if our Black and Latino boys are depressed, if we start to notice these signs. And I think, one of the first ways to do this is to ask them directly in a very calm, loving, and open way, and really be ready to offer resources and support. But it's also important to ask those around them. So asking their friends if they've noticed these symptoms or changes, asking their teachers, and really getting a good sense of what their symptoms may look like, throughout the day and in different places. And with that, we'll transition to our last question, which is how does shame and guilt play a role in the suicide rates of young Black and brown boys?
I know that we have several comments in the chat, so I'm going to give an opportunity for our audience members to chime in with a question or two. And I'll wait for that to come up to the screen. Okay, so we have a question from Jay Siri. Shame is definitely a factor culturally, but so is the racial disparity of children in care. So parents, unfortunately, don't encourage, but more so discourage children to talk for fear of placement or worse. And so I'm assuming that we're talking about foster care. A lot of fear around consequences or punishment instead of support plays a steady hand in opening up. Parents also discourage out of feeling guilt for a child's diagnosis. So as long as the kid is okay, they feel that their parenting is okay. Thank you for that. And go ahead.
I just wanted to so I saw two words in the last comment really struck me, and it was shame and guilt. And so I think those two words are kind of poignant to me. When we think about shame is, it's identity based. It's hard to get rid of shame, right? If you do something wrong, you can be guilty, and you can kind of, you can kind of make up for, you can apologize. But shame is much more much more central to who you are in terms of as a concept. So I think that those, to me, I feel like those are really poignant words and really important in how we think about and work with kids who may be dealing with shame and guilt, because those are also core features of important predictors of suicide attempts.
Yeah, you know what? I also want to just build on what Dr. McRae is saying. I think Jay provided a lot of that comment was potent. There's a lot there, right?
A lot. Yeah.
And so there's a couple of things I want to just highlight. One, I do think that this is from my work, from my research and clinical practice. I think Jay hit a lot of things on the head, right? One is that we hear from families their concern about what the therapeutic process will entail. We have often, and I know I heard myself growing up, I'm sure everyone in these panels have heard from their family, do not talk about the family business in public. Do not say to anyone what is happening in this house. And so what families fear is that something is going to come up in therapy, and they think that therapists or clinicians are going to, get in contact with child welfare or some other professional, law enforcement, unfortunately, if that might even be the case. And so there's this sort of like reticence then to be involved in therapeutic processes because of that. And so I think that that's a huge issue that we have to overcome and help to, educate where necessary, but also really explain to families what the process will entail. I think that just as we want to know if we have an invasive surgical procedure, we want to know all the details. I think we owe it as practitioners or researchers who work with communities who have been, mistreated or misused in terms of research and even in clinical practices. We owe it to them to explain what that process will entail from A to Z. And I also think, and Dr. McCrae picked up on this point too. I also think that families, and I had a parent tell me one time that she was afraid to have her daughter participate in our clinical program in school because she felt or thought that we were going to blame her for her child's depression. And so I think it then, represents or reflects for us an opportunity to really explain that, depression is something that could be it can be passed along from generation to generation. It could be related to environmental circumstances, the whole nine, and that it's not about bad parenting, And so I think those are really, really key issues that we owe it to our families to be very clear about so that we can destigmatize and demystify in some ways what the therapy process is going to be about.
Yeah, and I would also add too that incorporating more culturally inclusive practices in therapy, right, is important, and then also having an opportunity to work with clinicians that look like you, that you feel are going to understand your experiences, and understand why you may have spanked your child, or why you perhaps didn't reach out for help earlier, right, or understand the faith-based part of yourself that gets included when you're thinking about care, self-care, or treatment. Or what you should do. So I just wanted to lift that up.
So many great answers. So I'll only add a little bit to the conversation, but from my perspective, shame and guilt plays a very large role in the rising suicide rates among Black and brown boys because these feelings can be an obstacle to asking for help. Shame and guilt also leads to feeling like a burden, and it can lead to Black and brown boys feeling like they're a burden to their family members. And this increased feeling of being a burden can increase risk for suicide. And we know that shame can stem from different cultural factors and what our youth have learned about what it means to have mental health challenges. And so Black and brown boys are often taught to not show weakness and to be strong. So when that's not the case, it makes them feel ashamed. It makes them feel like they're a failure, which also increases depression and risk for suicide. Guilt can also play a role in suicide because Black and brown boys feel the need to be a support system for their families, especially if they are one of the oldest siblings or they, have a job or support their families in a variety of ways. And so when you're depressed and suicidal, it's difficult to provide that kind of support to your family members and loved ones, which can lead to these feelings of grief and hopelessness that can, in worst case scenarios, really spiral into suicide. And so, well, that was the last question, and I just want to say broadly that this was an amazing panel. I'm happy that we had a chance to revisit this very, very important and timely topic, and really learn and dive a little bit deeper into the rising rates of suicide among our Black and brown boys. And so next up, we'll close out with just a few tips and free resources. And one of the tips that I would like to leave folks is really try your best to learn more about depression and suicide. There are a lot of different resources out there for learning about what depression and suicide look, particularly among Black and Latino boys. I also encourage everyone to talk about these things in your families. Have frequent check-ins with each other. Really normalize that it's okay to not be okay. And finally, I really want us to think about we can start the process for searching for mental health services even when there isn't a crisis. And so you don't have to go to therapy when you're about to fall off the ledge. You can really go to help prevent things from spiraling to the point where you feel really depressed or suicidal. And I'm seeing that we have one question from the audience. Yeah, so one question from the audience is, are there any sport groups that give parents the language to help them with their teams? And that's a really great question. I'm not sure of any sport groups um, off the top of my head that give parents a language, but I'm sure they exist. And that's a support group. Sorry, that makes a lot more sense. So yes, at the Hope Center, I'm pretty sure that we have resources and groups there to help give parents a language to help them talk about depression and suicide with your teens and in your families. You can also go to, there's a couple resources that we're going to share in just a second, and they also offer a list of resources and support groups in your community, wherever you live, that can help you talk to your teen about depression and suicide. And so the two free resources I want to leave with you all are one, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-TALK or 273-8255. You can also go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. And finally, the crisis text line. And this is a text line that you can text 24/7. It's free and confidential. And if you or someone you know needs help with depressive thoughts or suicidal thoughts, you can text WORTHY to 741-741. Thank you all so much for watching us today. I hope this was informative. We really appreciate your presence. And one last time, we want to remind you that this Saturday is our Wellness and Self-Care Fair. This Saturday from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Catch us between 119th Street, between St. Nicholas and ACP Junior Boulevard. We hope to see you there. And you can also check out the Hope Center on the web at www.hopecenterharlem.org. All right. Good night, everyone. And until next time.